The weeks that followed Claire's lunch with Daniel passed with a strange new energy stirring inside her. She could no longer deny it, her world was subtly, undeniably shifting. But it wasn't the kind of whirlwind passion or reckless abandon that movies often portray. It was quieter, gentler, yet no less powerful. Claire felt awake at home. Life continued in its usual rhythm. Mark was the same steady presence, kind, focused on his work, occasionally asking how her day had gone. He still worked long hours from their home office, sometimes forgetting to look up when she entered the room. He was comfortable, yes, but somehow also distant. And Claire wasn't sure if it was Mark who had changed or if it was her. A subtle transformation one morning. Claire woke up and decided to do something different. She looked in the mirror and brushed her hair carefully, pulling it back loosely rather than the usual tight bun she wore for work. She picked out a dress she hadn't worn in years, a soft, flowing red number that made her feel seen. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd forgotten. At the office, her colleagues noticed. There was a new spark in her eyes, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Claire felt lighter, as if she was finally stepping out of a shadow she'd been living in for years. Daniel's gentle presence, meanwhile, Daniel didn't push. He never pressured her or demanded more than she was willing to give. Instead, he continued to be a calm, steady presence in her life. Their meetings were infrequent, sometimes a coffee, sometimes a quick lunch, or a brief chat after a work presentation. But each encounter left Claire feeling more alive, more herself. One evening, her firm was invited to showcase their branding work at a gala held at Daniel's flagship restaurant, Walsh and Harbor. It was an elegant affair filled with soft jazz music, low lighting, and the aroma of fine food. Claire arrived feeling nervous but excited. She wore that same red dress, the one that made her feel like she belonged in a different life, one filled with passion, possibility, and courage. A moment suspended in time across the room. Daniel spotted her immediately. His eyes seemed to light up in recognition, not just of the woman she had become, but of the woman he believed she always was. He walked over quietly, his voice low but warm. "You look like the version of you the world forgot," he whispered as he passed by. Claire's breath caught. For a moment, nothing else existed except the two of them and the weight of those words. She wasn't sure if it was the dress, the lighting, or the way Daniel said it, but she felt like she was standing on the edge of something thrilling and terrifying all at once. The struggle inside that night when Claire returned home and slipped into bed beside Mark. She felt a strange mix of emotions: guilt, desire, confusion, and hope. Mark was already asleep, his steady breathing a reminder of the life she had built, the promises she had made. But Claire couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, about how he made her feel truly seen, truly desired, not for duty or convenience, but for who she was beneath it all. She wondered if Mark even noticed her anymore, or if they were two strangers sharing a house bound by routine rather than love. An awakening in the days that followed. Claire found herself reading poetry, again something she hadn't done since college. She cooked new recipes, tried new music, even started sketching ideas for a personal art project, a spark of creativity she had long ignored. Daniel's influence wasn't overt. It was subtle, like a breeze that shifts the direction of a sailboat. One afternoon, Daniel invited Claire to take a walk along the waterfront after a meeting. The sky was clear, the water calm. They walked in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable silence that only happens between two people who understand each other without words. Daniel stopped and turned to her. "Claire," he said softly, "you deserve to feel alive, to want more, to be more." Claire looked into his eyes and saw not just attraction, but compassion and respect. The choice ahead that evening. Claire sat alone in her apartment, the city lights twinkling outside her window. She thought about everything Daniel had said, everything she'd felt these past weeks. She was standing at a crossroads. Stay in the quiet. predictable safety of her marriage, or step into the unknown to a life where she could be truly herself, even if it meant heartbreak, risk, and change. For the first time, Claire realized that desire wasn't a betrayal. It was a signal, a call to live more honestly and fully. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing. She couldn't go back to the woman she was before Daniel. A cliffhanger, and then. One afternoon, Daniel called her with unexpected news. "I want to see you," he said simply. Claire hesitated. Her heart was pounding. She whispered to herself, "Is this the moment where I say yes?" The afternoon air was crisp, with early autumn's chill as Claire and Daniel met by the waterfront. The sky was a soft, melancholy shade of gray, and the water beneath the pier rippled gently. Neither of them said much at first. Words, after. All had become complicated between them, too heavy. Too risky. They walked side by side, their steps slow. The silence between them comfortable but filled with meaning. The truth beneath the Claire's heart was a storm of emotion, guilt, fear, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. She looked at Daniel, wondering how someone could feel like home and yet be the reason for so much inner turmoil. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Claire," he said softly, "I don't want to be the reason your life becomes harder. But I need you to know something." Claire turned to him, sensing the seriousness in his voice. "I never wanted to come between you and Mark," Kay continued, "but being with you even like this has made me believe again. Believe in connection, in possibility." Tears welled in Claire's eyes. The ache inside her made visible. She wanted to reach out, to hold on to him, but she also knew this moment was fragile, too delicate to grasp tightly. The weight of silence. They stood by the water's edge, watching the ferries pass slowly by, each carrying people to places Claire could only dream of visiting. It was an ending and a beginning, all at once. Claire swallowed hard. "I said no at first," she whispered, "but what you did to me fascinated me." Daniel smiled faintly, a mixture of sadness and gratitude in his eyes. "And you fascinated me, Claire, more than you know." They didn't say goodbye. Not with words. Instead, they simply parted ways, each walking down a different path with hearts heavier but somehow lighter. 2. Coming home. When Claire arrived home that evening, Mark was sitting on the couch, the same man she had married years ago, but also a stranger she no longer fully understood. She sat down beside him, feeling the weight of unspoken truths between them. "Mark," she began carefully, "we need to talk." He looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. Claire took a deep breath. "I've been feeling lost, invisible. I don't want to hurt you, but I need more from life. From us." Mark was silent for a moment, then reached for her hand. "I'm here," he said quietly. "Tell me what you need." For the first time in a long time, Claire felt hope stir inside her. A new chapter, then. Fair with Daniel hadn't been a betrayal, it had been a mirror. It showed Claire what she had been missing, not in Mark, but in herself. With honesty and courage, she began to rebuild her marriage, not on routine or obligation, but on openness and desire. She and Mark started going to therapy, rediscovering each other beneath the years of comfort and complacency. And while Daniel remained a beautiful memory, a chapter of awakening, Claire's heart was now focused on the possibility of love renewed. Reflection. Sitting by her window one evening, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky, Claire smiled softly. She had said no at first, but what Daniel did to her, the way he made her feel alive again, was something she would carry with her forever. Not as regret, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest awakenings come from the places we least expect, and that love, in all its forms, is worth the risk. The end. It was one of those gray, quiet afternoons in Seattle, the kind where the clouds hang so low they feel like they might touch your shoulders. Claire Richardson stood by the window of her small but stylish design studio, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. The rain had been falling all day, and she didn't mind. She liked the way it muffled the noise of the world at 34. Claire had everything that should have made her happy on paper. She was married to a dependable man, Mark, a software engineer who worked from home and preferred his routine like a warm blanket. They had a townhouse in Queen Anne. No kids yet, but plans for maybe one day. Her business, a boutique graphic design firm she'd started 5 years ago, had survived the early chaos and was now comfortably stable. And yet, despite everything being fine, Claire felt hollow inside. It wasn't that Mark was cruel or inattentive. He was simply settled. The kind of man who said I love you more out of habit than passion. They still went on dates, occasionally, usually the same restaurant, always home by 9. When they talked, it was about bills, schedules, laundry. The spark, gone. The thrill, a distant memory. Claire wasn't looking to escape her marriage. She wasn't unhappy in a dramatic movie scene way, but she felt invisible, like a character written into someone else's story. So when her firm was hired to handle a rebranding campaign for a high-end restaurant chain, she was eager for the creative challenge. The client was a well-known name in Seattle's culinary scene. Walsh and Harbor, a sleek, upscale dining experience with deep mahogany interiors and a menu that rotated with the seasons. The owner, Daniel Walsh, was scheduled to meet her and her team on a Thursday afternoon. Claire didn't think much of it. She expected another stiff business owner with tight deadlines and little imagination. But Daniel was nothing like she imagined. He walked into the studio wearing a dark wool coat, no umbrella despite the rain. Tall, mid to late 30s, with the kind of presence that filled a room before he even spoke. His eyes were a piercing blue, the kind that made you pause. He smiled easily, but not too much. Confident without being arrogant. When they shook hands, his grip was warm and steady. "You must be Claire," he said. "I've heard good things." She smiled politely, motioning him to sit. But her heart had already started to race, and she hated that it did. As the meeting began, Claire noticed something unusual. Daniel listened. Not just the professional kind of listening, but the real kind. He asked questions about her vision, challenged her ideas without dismissing them, and laughed not in that "I'm trying to flirt" kind of way, but like he actually enjoyed talking to her. For the first time in a long while, Claire felt seen. The meeting lasted longer than expected. Her assistant had left for the day. Rain still tapped against the windows like a quiet drumbeat. As she packed up her laptop, Daniel lingered by the door. "Do you drink wine?" he asked casually, with a kind of calm confidence that made it hard to say no. Claire froze. He wasn't pushy, his tone wasn't seductive or dangerous. But something about the question felt like a line being drawn. She looked at him, really looked. And what scared her wasn't the attraction. It was how much she wanted to say yes, but she didn't. "No," she said quickly, almost too firmly. "I mean, thank you, but I should get home." Daniel nodded. No disappointment in his expression. Of course. Maybe another time professionally. She smiled, more out of politeness than anything else. Of course. She gathered her things and left. Out in the parking lot, the rain was heavier now. She didn't even bother with her umbrella. Her thoughts were louder than the weather. Claire sat in her car, hands on the steering wheel, heart still racing. She hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't crossed a line, but she'd felt something, a pull, quiet shift inside her. And the worst part, it felt good when she got home. Mark was watching TV. He looked up, smiled absently, and said, "Hey, babe." "Dinner's on the stove." Claire nodded, kissed him on the head, and went to the kitchen. She ate quietly, stirring her food more than she tasted it that night. Lying in bed beside her husband, she stared at the ceiling. Rain tapped softly on the windows. Daniel's voice echoed in her mind. His eyes, the warmth in his tone. She whispered to herself almost guiltily, "I said no." But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. After that first meeting with Daniel Walsh, Claire tried hard to push him out of her mind. But it wasn't easy. Every time she sat down at her desk or brewed her morning coffee, a small voice whispered reminders of his blue eyes, his calm voice. The way he listened like she was the only person in the room. She told herself it was just a passing feeling, a momentary distraction. After all, she was married to Mark, a good man who had been by her side for nearly 8 years. Mark wasn't perfect, but he was steady, dependable, someone Claire could count on. And that was supposed to be enough. Yet, in the quiet moments, she realized it WASN single quotes T. Days passed. The rain outside finally gave way to clear skies and the first hints of spring. Claire buried herself in work. Her graphic design firm was busy with new clients. Deadlines piled up, and she stayed late at the office, refusing to let herself be alone with her thoughts. But then her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Claire. This is Daniel Walsh. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I wanted to say thank you again for your time last week. Your ideas have stayed with me. Would you consider meeting for coffee? No work talk, just a friendly conversation. Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the screen. Thumb hovering over the keyboard, her first instinct was to delete it, to ignore it and pretend it never happened. But something inside her urged her to respond. After a moment, she typed back, "Thank you, Daniel. Coffee sounds nice. When?" He replied almost immediately. "Tomorrow, noon, Cafe Blue near Pike Place." She agreed, despite the fluttering nerves in her stomach. The next day, Claire arrived at the cafe early. It was a cozy spot, tucked away from the busy market streets. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air. She spotted Daniel already sitting at a corner table, casually dressed but still carrying that quiet confidence. He smiled when he saw her and stood to greet her with a polite hug. "Thank you for coming," he said warmly. They ordered drinks and settled into their chairs. For the first few minutes, they talked about small things: Seattle's weather, the best places to eat in the city, a new art exhibit opening downtown. Claire noticed that with Daniel, the conversation flowed easily. No awkward silences, no forced smiles. Just two people sharing moments of connection. Then, the conversation took a more personal turn. Daniel spoke about his divorce, carefully choosing his words. "It was painful," he said quietly. "I didn't expect it to change everything in my life." Claire nodded, surprised by his honesty. She told him about her marriage. It's a comfortable routine that sometimes felt more like a cage than a home. They talked about loneliness. It's a kind that can exist even when you're with someone. About longing not just for another person, but for something more in life. At one point, Claire glanced at the clock and realized an hour had passed. Time felt different with Daniel, slower, more meaningful. But as she looked around the cafe, a sudden wave of guilt washed over her. What was she doing? Talking to another man like this? "Shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel reached across the table and gently touched her hand. His touch was light, reassuring. "You're not doing anything wrong," he said softly. "Sometimes we just need to talk, to feel heard." Claire looked down at their hands, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't want to admit it, but she was drawn to him, not just physically, but emotionally. When the meeting ended, Daniel walked her to the door. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. Claire forced a smile and nodded that evening. Claire sat alone in her living room, Mark in the next room, finishing some work on his laptop. She felt torn. She loved Mark in her own way, was safe and familiar. But Daniel had stirred something else inside her, something she couldn't explain. The longing, the excitement, the fear. She wondered if she was being unfair to Mark or to herself. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Claire found herself replaying the conversation with Daniel in her mind over and over. She noticed small things: how Daniel's voice could be gentle, how his laugh was unexpected and genuine, how he seemed to see her in a way Mark hadn't in years. She tried to talk to Mark about it, but the words caught in her throat. "How do you tell your husband that you feel invisible? That someone else makes you feel alive? Instead, Claire buried her feelings deep and threw herself into work again. But then Daniel texted her again. "Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" Claire hesitated. This time she didn't say no right away. Instead, she wrote back, "Okay, lunch." Lunch meeting was casual. No wine, no romance, just two people sharing a meal and stories. Daniel listened as Claire spoke about her dreams of traveling, her love for poetry, and the small frustrations of her daily life. She realized that with Daniel she could be honest without judgment. After lunch, they walked together along the waterfront. The sun was warm, the breeze cool. They didn't hold hands, didn't lean in close. But there was an unspoken connection, thread pulling them together as they parted ways. Daniel looked at Claire with a smile that was both hopeful and respectful. "Whatever happens, want you to know that I'm here," he said quietly. Claire felt tears prick her.